Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Venerable Tarpa, and this is the Secular Buddhist Essentials program. We're here for another teaching. Before we begin, let's take a moment to appreciate our lovely Sangha that's gathered here today. Today, I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing the present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today, I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And as conscientious practitioners, which I know you all are, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while always striving to improve it. Again, welcome back, everybody. I am thrilled to be here. I got a great teaching planned for you. And so we are currently working through the Secular Buddhist Essentials program, and we're still in the first part, which is called Introduction, History, and Adaptation. And so we're about halfway through that. Right now we're looking at the later stages of Indian Buddhism. So the introduction covered the Buddha, his life story, and the Buddha's life up to his passing. And so in this section, we're looking at from the Buddha's passing forward. And currently we're looking at Indian Buddhism. Right? So this is Buddhism still in India. And I had a little graphic that I wanted to share and to make it easy for everybody. So they talk about the three vehicles of Indian Buddhism. When they talk about vehicle, they really mean vehicle. They mean something that gets you to point A to point B, whether it's a car or a school bus. In the Buddhist contents, they're usually referring to a raft. And there's a story that Buddhism is a raft to take you to the other shore of awakening, of liberation. And so that's the picture of it. And so they do talk about them like they're actual vehicles, like cars. In this case, we have three. We learned about the Nikaya, which is the early Buddhist schools. We talked about that thoroughly during the introduction. The Nikaya vehicle focuses strongly on individual liberation and monasticism with the aim of attaining nirvana. And we're going to talk about all of these in more detail. Mahayana is the second vehicle, the large or universal vehicle. It's like a school bus, right? The Nikaya is like a scooter with one person. The Mahayana is like a school bus where we can ourselves, we're working for liberation, but we're bringing everybody aboard. Isn't that nice? The Mahayana vehicle focuses on reaching enlightenment as a society with the aim of attaining Buddhahood, beyond nirvana to Buddhahood. And number three is Vajrayana, which we're going to be talking about today. They call it the diamond vehicle. A later extension of the Mahayana, the Vajrayana, is an esoteric or secret, spooky tantric vehicle with the aim of attaining Buddhahood. I promise I'll stop being silly. I don't know how you guys put up with me. I think it's a sign of being happy, to be honest with you. Okay, so in today's class, we're going to be digging in. Let's see if I could find it 1 second. I have some notes here somewhere. we're going to be digging into the Vajrayana. And before we start, I think I should add some caveats. One of them is that most of my education was in Vajrayana. I started off in Zen Buddhism when I was young, but quickly at the beginning I moved into Vajrayana, which is generally thought of as Tibetan Buddhism. And so I was a huge Vajrayana fan and practitioner. I practiced it for something like 30 years. In fact, I went to Gyumay Tantric Monastic University in South India, which is probably the number one school for Tantric Buddhism in the Gelug school in the world. I was the first Westerner to ever study there, and I was the only Westerner to study there for 5 years. So I studied there. I did all my Tantric, all my Vajrayana classes. I possess all the highest empowerments in Vajrayana, which culminates in the Tantra of Guhya Samaja. And so I just wanted to say all that up front. And so we're going to talk about the Vajrayana, and maybe we'll talk about the reason why I don't practice the Vajrayana. But I don't want to discourage it in any way. It is an amazing and complicated path. So let's get back to the actual class itself. So Vajrayana is usually translated as diamond vehicle. If you've ever seen Tibetan Buddhists, they have in rituals they'll have a bell and a little weird symbol, and it's called a dorje, and they'll do these beautiful little things with it and ring the bell. The dorje looks like they often call it a thunderbolt, but it's just a little implement. And they're used it symbolizes ritualistic things. Well, that's kind of the idea of what a dorje or a vajra is. Vajra is the Sanskrit word for dorje. But I think that complicates it. I think it's best to call it the diamond vehicle, with the idea that a diamond that's able to cut through obscurations. That's the idea. Vajrayana is a Sanskrit term for Tantric Buddhism. And I think a lot of you have heard the word Tantric. It's a buzzword nowadays. People are offering Tantric yoga and Tantric sex classes in the backs of magazines. And people like that would always reach out to me with questions. And it's like they have no idea what's going on. It's completely unlegitimate, all the stuff they're doing. Tantric is an esoteric or secret teaching and practice that simply utilizes magic to achieve awakening. Now, I don't think my Vajrayana friends like it when I term it that way, but it really is, in the simplest terms, it really is applying this magic. They would say real magic, but nevertheless magic. The term Tantra is synonymous with the term yoga. However, here the term yoga pertains not to the popular exercise, but instead of the manipulation of psychophysical energies, including body energies centered on chakras, right? It's all about moving energies throughout the body. Tantra is a unique class of teachings and practices that's found in all native Indian religions, which includes Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. The earliest tantras, or tantra text, they call them tantras, emerged within shamanistic movements led by Indian siddhas, or tantric ascetics. These early tantrikas, as they're called, engaged in macabre, occult-like practices outside of the confines of civilized society, often living in charnel grounds and cemeteries, and in which they harness these psychophysical energies through highly ritualized forms of practice that often involve elements that were considered immoral at the time and now. Things like, excuse me, things like animal sacrifice, eating meat for Brahmins back then, the use of intoxicants, the use of sex, and violence. Historically, it appears that the early Tantras first began to consolidate into a proper system of practice within the Indian Hindu Shivist tradition, or Shaivism, around the 5th century CE, before later spreading to Buddhism and then Jainism. The Tantras didn't coalesce into the mature Buddhist Vajrayana tradition until the early 7th century. So what makes Tantra or Vajrayana interesting is that it happened so much later in history. We actually have a lot more documentation and proof about this. Vajrayana is considered to be a later extension of Mahayana tradition. So Vajrayana is Mahayana. It accepts the Nikayas, the Mahayana, the Vajrayana text as authentic teachings of the Buddha, taught by the Buddha himself within his own lifetime, and later publicly surfacing around the 7th century. Vajrayana's tantric practices utilize a vast array, again, of mental, physical techniques aimed at developing and purifying the mind, including the accumulation of wisdom and merit through study, contemplation, and meditation, visualizations, ritual, chanting, there's mantra recitations, as long as a whole slew of different kinds of ritual, and importantly, devotional practices towards deities. This is a very unique aspect. Ethan Namdak last week was asking about deities and where they start to come in Buddhism, and I didn't have a chance to answer it. So the idea of mystical beings is there in all forms of Buddhism. From the very beginning, we have the idea of the Hindu gods or devas are present in all the early Buddhist scriptures, as well as all kinds of strange mystical beings like nagas, which are like fish serpent people with magical powers. There's also the idea of spirits and hungry ghosts. So that's throughout Buddhism. But with the rise of the Mahayana, the focus starts to turn more towards deities that help us in practice, meaning bodhisattvas that after passing, they can remain to benefit us, right? So you can pray to bodhisattvas to help you in your practice, or Buddhas also. And then there's also Dharma protectors, which look hideous. They look like monsters, but the idea is that Buddhism was so powerful that at one point it conquered these evil beings and turned them into good. So even though they look demonic and monstrous, they're now working towards good. So it's a fascinating thing, history to read about. So, and then in Tantra, it just goes to a whole nother level of deities. And even stories like one of the great Tibetan masters, Tsongkhapa, is said to have been able to have conversations with Manjushri, the deity, the Buddha of wisdom, where he literally saw him sitting there all the time with him. He could ask him questions all the time. So there's a lot of mysticism. So the further Buddhism goes, the more mystical it becomes, the more religious it becomes. There's no doubt about that. Especially with this strongly devotional practice towards deities. So Any questions? Maybe this is a good point for some questions. What do you guys think about this Vajra tantric wild stuff? I got some stories you wouldn't believe. Oh, Mr. Padma, please share.
It's quite hard listening to that, to be honest. From a secular perspective, it's a bit of a jagged pill to swallow all of that. Do you not feel that that's a long way off from the Buddha's teachings? That it's been interpreted, and we've ended up with these mystical creatures, you know?
I have my own personal views on that very much,
That's what it feels
but
like. That's
but
what it
but
feels
well,
like.
well, but the thing about secular Buddhism is we're just open. We learn about these things. Each one of us can make up our minds for ourselves. SBT doesn't have a view that everybody has to buy into. That makes no sense to me in any way. That, oh, I've figured it out here. Everybody believe this. Here's your book of all the things you're going to believe in. You're all wise. And who am I to say these things don't exist just as well? I mean, they sound outlandish, but, who knows? Maybe they're true. Paul, please share with us.
I always thought Buddhism kind of picked up the local deities just as it went around Asia, a lot like Christianity kind of picked up all the local customs. Like, oh yeah, we got that. Come on in, and they kind of just turned them into meditation focuses. At least that's how I understand them.
You understand them correctly. That's exactly what happens. And also, as Buddhism travels to different countries, it merges with the traditions that are there. And so, even today, when you travel Asia, in every Buddhist country I went to, Buddhism was always a mix. And in South Asia, it's a mix with shamanistic practices, which I believe are pretty Hindu. And so, what's funny is everybody will have these deities and things, local shamanic things that they, for day to day things, they pray to, they make offerings to. And then in a lot of the countries, Buddhism is saved for just for death, right? So you pray to all these deities for good stuff in life, but when it comes to death, you want a good rebirth. So then you go to the Buddhists for that. But they're always a mix, not so much with the monastics as you can imagine. That's kind of there. It trickles in. Monastics are pretty good about pure Buddhism. Buddhism entering Tibet is influenced by the local Bön religion of Tibet. When it later ages of like the Mahayana in India start to take on all the other Indian religions as well. As we mentioned, Tantra seems clearly a Hindu practice, beginning with the shamanistic from the Shivites, which becomes so popular in India that the other religious traditions have to develop it just to stay relevant. So there's some, yeah, it's quite fascinating. But you're exactly right. They're all blends. Now Buddhists say that the blends are a good thing. The Buddhists say that when Buddhism travels to another country, like it does here in America, it really should be mixed with the local culture, so it stays relevant for that tradition. Other groups disagree with that, like the purist Theravada, the forest Theravada. They believe that it's just all bad news. Wangmo, thank you, Paul. That was very nice.
I'm sorry, I may have skipped some people. If I did, I apologize. I was wondering, Tarpa, if you could touch a little bit on the concept of there being many, many Buddhas. Um, if Buddhism started with Shakyamuni Buddha, are there many, many Buddhas because he said there were many Buddhas before him? Or where does this concept of there being many Buddhas before him, where does that come from?
It comes from the very beginning. Which traditions and how many Buddhas is different. Oftentimes, I think the most common is 7 Buddhas. Now, these are unique Buddhas, right? These are what they call wheel-turning Buddhas. A wheel-turning Buddha is a Buddha who's not taught the Dharma, who somehow is able to bring it forth on their own, and then they share it in a world system. So the Theravada usually posit the seven. And then the Mahayana come in and they posit millions of Buddhas. In fact, in my tantric practices, we learn that every atom of the body has a Buddha on it, and so pretty interesting. I said, "Oh, not mine." Yeah, Dana, please.
So Manayana, what I've been taught, and I think I've heard you say it. I just clarification is that everyone has Buddha nature,
Yes.
and we have these afflictions that get in the way, and that sort of thing. And so and then also what I this is Americanized Tibetan or whatever is that these deities are actually can be looked at more as like myself as my psychological state. So is that? I mean, I know.
Well, that's the sugar coated version.
Yeah.
So, like I think, like all disciplines, they try to people try to naturally make things more relevant, and so yeah, they toned it all down. And another caveat I'd like to add is that oftentimes people say that, oh, we're not getting the real Buddhism in America; it's all watered down, and you have to go to Asia. Well, guess what? I've lived in Tibet. I've been all over. I studied Tibetan Buddhism. I was the only Westerner there studying it all in Tibetan. And I can guarantee you, we get the real thing in America. But we do tend to sugarcoat it. But the Tibetans themselves have done it. So at the beginning, there's no doubt about it. Early on, that Tibetans believed all these deities were real. Really real, no doubt about it. I mean, their greatest master, Tsongkhapa, claimed that he's just walking around with Manjushri here. He's telling him Manjushri can ask any question he wants to, and so there's no doubt about it that they thought that was and then they just start to try to bring some common sense, I guess, for a lack of a better term, into it. So the current view now, the Dalai Lama often likes to share, is that these deities are like a mask that a Buddha can put on. Remember, there's millions of Buddhas. So for like Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara, the deity of compassion, it's a mask or an a way of emanating into the world with those qualities. So a Buddha can put on that mask and manifest that kind of awakened compassion for the world. And then also there can be many Avalokiteshvaras because there's many Buddhas. So they kind of paint it like that. I've heard also, like you said, about this just being psychological expressions of us. Now, you do that in practice when you're doing malas or mantras of Avalokiteshvara. You're supposed to picture those qualities within yourself that are compassionate, and you're trying to draw those qualities out. So we all have that component of Avalokiteshvara within us, right? We all, in plain words, we all have compassion and empathy. So there's many ways they kind of spin it.
On Sundays, on the refuge Sundays that you do, we usually do that meditation where we take on the aspects of Buddha, right? And anyway, that's
well, for us as a secular group, those are just visualizations.
right.
Those are, so when we say take on the qualities, think about our own awakened quality at whatever lower level they're at, and try to emphasize those and embody those.
Yeah. And you don't have to answer this now, but the Vajrayana, I understand Padmasambhava came to Tibet, and one of the things he brought was Dzogchen meditation, and that's a part of Vajrayana because it doesn't have what I've been exposed to, it hasn't been any of the deities is not involved, and it's
Yeah, Dzogchen has branched out. Originally, it was the original Buddhism of Tibet. In fact, many in Nalanda accused Padmasambhava of trying to start his own religion, and many think that that's just some gossip. I don't know if it's true, but the idea of but Dzogchen starts is in the Nyingma tradition, and all the tantric elements are there. But after in modern times, Dzogchen has been taught without all the aspects from the Nyingma school, almost as if it's a tradition of its own, without making students do Nundro and things like that. But that's more of a modern take,
Thank you.
in my humble opinion, from what I know. We actually have quite a few Nyingma practitioners in our Sangha. And pretty cool stuff, yeah. Oh, how about Namdak?
Oops, I'm muted. So I guess parts of my question have been somewhat answered, and I appreciate that. Personally, the between Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, the greatest gap in my knowledge is about Tibetan form of Vajrayana Buddhism. And yeah, a question I had to do with kind of the origin of that devotional, ritualistic practice towards bodhisattvas. But I guess my question is, one, what is that practice like in practice, like in the real world? What does that devotional stuff towards bodhisattvas look like? And then the second part of it is there an adaptability, or what recommendations would you have or suggestions you'd have for adapting that practice towards a more secular
Cool.
perspective?
Cool. So initially, the work with deities is simply doing devotional prayers, asking for their assistance in your own practice, and again, trying to find those qualities in yourself that the deities all represent. Human qualities. They all represent enlightened qualities, awakened qualities. Now, the practices are quite extensive. Things like imagining the deity above your head and a water full of nectar is pouring down on you. You use visualization techniques for seeing the deity in front of you. And you do it so intensely, you get to the point where you can see the deity even when you're out of meditation, standing there right before you. So, and you do that by reciting their mantra 100 or 1,000,000 times, literally 1,000,000 times, while trying to visualize them. And then remarkably, at some time, it happens. And I was like, that's not so remarkable. You know, if you were gonna pick your favorite Hollywood actor and you're going to say their name 1,000,000 times, which you think about this hundreds of times every day while you're saying a prayer and you're trying to visualize them, the chances are they're going to pop up in a few dreams or places. So anyways, to adapt it to modern, it's already adaptable. You can use the idea, the image of Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva compassion, who, by the way, is the Dalai Lama. Not an emanation. Tibetans consider him Avalokiteshvara. He is the most compassionate being in the universe. And so you can use that image, you can use thoughts of them, you can use prayers to draw those qualities out in yourself, to improve those qualities. So very, very adaptable to the secular, and then I would offer the opposite caveat and just say, is it really needed? Do you a lot in psychology, the idea of archetypes, like in Jungian philosophy, archetypes are quite useful in human psychology, right? Archetypes of different things, father, mother. So that's there. But I often wonder, is it necessary? Sometimes I think just actually practicing compassion in the real world, like really directly working with it, I think is probably more productive. David.
Yeah. If you mention Tantra or Tantric to anybody in the West, they immediately think of sex. Is that just a Western purient fascination, or was that in fact central to religion?
Yes to both. So of course, it's the most interesting thing of Vajrayana or Tantra. Okay, so initially, in the very early beginnings of Tantra, and I'm not talking about Tantric Buddhism, I'm talking about Tantra, the aim of the practice was only for men. And the idea is they go out to the forest, and the idea was to summon goddesses, ferocious goddesses, that would either and you give yourself to the goddess as a servant, and the goddess, if they took you, they would have sex with you, or if they didn't, they would eat you. And the hope is that if they have sex with you and teach you their ways, the goal is to become a universal what's the word, magician, or that was the goal of the initial, to be Lord of the universe through this power. And it was very macabre, very strange, but sex has always been there. And then when you're working with a teacher, you would have a consort, which would be male or female, depending on who you are, and you would engage in tantric spiritual sex, which is very much rooted in meditation. But and the idea is that the sexual energy is one of the strongest energies that we know, and to take that and harness it and direct it into spiritual practice, it becomes like rocket fuel for awakening, and the fastest way to become awakened, according to rumor. So that's still there in all the traditions. Vajrayana takes it, and of course it's a bit more secret, but it's still there. Sexual union, yamyang it's called, is still the highest, most advanced practice in Vajrayana Buddhism to this day. And then, of course, monastics are celibate, so we can perform that. So the idea is that they visualize it. And then many will assume that, that monastics, many higher teachers say monastics can never become awakened because they can't engage in this practice. So everybody dabbles with Tantra, and they're learning it, and they got all their bells and whistles and gongs, and they're doing all their stuff, and they think they're amazing tantric masters, but a lot of them don't really know where it's going. And there's some really gross stuff in it I will not share now. So I, as a tantric practitioner, I took a vow to never tell all the secrets, or I will burn in hell forever. They even have a special hell for people that break their samaya, and tell the tantric secrets. So I tell a couple, but I'm careful. Yeah. As much as I'm secular, I still have a little worry there. So, yeah, it's alive and well. It's there, and it's been abused terribly in the Tibetan tradition, especially in the Hindu tradition. Boy, these tantric sex cults are everywhere, from Osho to, and always a disaster, always just leaving a trail of victims. And Tibetan Buddhism too. I often say, as we start secular Buddhism, that the age of gurus is over. And maybe this is a good time for me to share my opinion as well. So I finished my education at school, and I was actually working on a text. So I wrote in the monastery. my thesis was Tibetan Buddhist Essentials. It's a 3-part series, and I wrote that, and I was going to follow that up with Tibetan Tantra Essentials, and I put a great deal of work into it, especially in the history of it all. I probably got about halfway done with the book. I have it written somewhere, and I just reached the point where that I stopped, and I realized that it wasn't something that I wanted to do. And it wasn't just out of disbelief. Of course, as a secular-minded person, as you can imagine, and probably you're feeling it the same way, there's a lot there that's really hard for me to swallow. But it was more than that, because I do believe it's a profound path. I do believe there's results. But the amount of work involved is just astounding. It is the most complex, labor-intensive Buddhist practice ever created. It is just great. So for me, it was a question of balancing it with the amount of work involved. And then on a personal level, I found the opposite worked better for me. As I simplified the Buddhist practice and I engaged more in real life instead of magical emanations in a cave somewhere, I found that I started to awaken. And prior to that, I didn't find any real awakening. I just found complexity. And it seemed to tie into a lot of my samsaric qualities. So I started SBT with the idea that through simplicity, that's what seemed to be awakening myself and my students. And so I turned to secular Buddhism. So as you can see, I don't have any strong views of Vajrayana. I kind of leave it alone. I've met some great Vajrayana masters, there's no doubt about it. But I also don't know if they were any greater than some of the great Theravada masters I met. And the great Theravada masters, I mean, this is a fairly simple, straightforward practice, right? Remember that all the schools practice the Nikayas. So he said, well, I'm in Tibetan Buddhism, I'm doing something different. No, you're still doing Nikayas. You're just adding on to it. The Mahayana is an addition to the Nikayas. It's a new set of teachings. The Vajrayana is an addition to those. So you can imagine the amount of work you're adding to that pile of practice is extraordinary, right? And so for me, it was just a rational thing, a rational decision that I made. Oh, don't mean to keep going on and on. There you have it. That's my take, everybody. And it's up to all of you to do. With that said, even SBT, we do have some elements of both Mahayana and Tantra. As much as I'm still not sure what to make of the Mahayana Sutras. Clearly not written by the Buddha, even though they're written in the Buddha's voice, which seems kind of a little copyright infringement, if you ask me, a little plagiarism. But I'm in love with the Bodhisattva path and vehicle, the Bodhisattva vows. In Tantra, we do a practice called taking the final result as the path, which is actually a tantric practice, but we do it in a secular way. The practice is when we envision ourselves, right, whether in meditation or as an awakened being, or as ourselves in a more awakened state in the future. And we look at that, and we try to have an experience of that. What would it look like? What would it feel like? How would I feel? How would people relate to me? We try to get a taste of it. And it's actually considered a very fast way to achieve it, because you're getting a taste of it at lower levels as you practice. So you're studying and practicing, but at the same time you're getting a direct kind of experience of it at the same time. Now in the tantric tradition, they take it a step further. You're given a meditation deity, a yidam, and so you're given a deity, and you're supposed to become that deity. So if somebody gives you Chenrezi, you're supposed to 24/7, you're supposed to become Chenrezig. See yourself like that, interact with others like that all the time. And as you can imagine, become an awakened being. So you're pretending to be Chenrezig until you convince yourself you really are. That doesn't sound very psychologically healthy, does it? Am I the only one? So that's kind of funny. I don't know if I should tell this story. A friend of mine got a yidam from his teacher, and he was quite surprised. So he was given a yidam of a black warrior woman with a big spear and a skull cup of menstrual blood. And he had to become her, right? And I think, oh, man, we got space in SBT if you change your mind. And I'm not going to tell any more stories. I'm getting in trouble already. Okay. Hey, one last thing I want to share with everybody. Differences in the three vehicles. Now, to really understand the three vehicles, there's like three components I think that really help. It's the way they assert the teacher, the way they assert the Buddha, and the way they assert the final aim of the path. Nikayas, which we started with, which is the early Buddhist schools, revere the Buddha as a perfected human being. These are my words, but I think that really sums it up. They revere the Buddha as a perfected human being who, through his own effort, awakened to the truth of reality, and after his death is believed to be no longer accessible to practitioners. The Nikaya's final aim is nirvana or enlightenment, to become an arahant or an awakened being. The Nikayas view their teachers as advanced human beings who guide us to awakening. Now, the Mahayana posit Buddha or Buddhas beyond human beings to an almost messianic level. To the Mahayanists, Buddhas are universal saviors who, after their existence, after their death, exist as cosmic beings or universal presence who continue to benefit and bestow blessings on all sentient beings. The Mahayana believe in a universe filled with countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The final aim of the Mahayana goes beyond mere nirvana to the attainment of Buddhahood itself, to become a Buddha, a fully awakened being. The Mahayana view their teachers as indispensable in the attainment of Buddhahood, without which awakening is simply not possible. The Vajrayana believe Buddhas never actually existed on the earth. Instead, while abiding in their Buddha realms or Buddha heavens, they merely emanated themselves into countless world systems in order to teach the Buddha Dharma. The final aim of Vajrayana is beyond mere nirvana to the attainment of Buddhahood itself, to become a Buddha. Vajrayanas take devotion to one's teacher. Teacher is known as guru in Sanskrit or lama in Tibetan, and those would be tantric teachers, right? To a whole other level, where complete obedience and devotion is requisite. Vajrayana holds the teacher as an indispensable element in the attainment of Buddhahood, without which awakening is not possible. And I probably should have added to that they see one's personal teacher as even more important than the Buddhas themselves. Well, what do you guys think of this stuff? We're finishing up this chapter on Indian Buddhism. Oh, Venerable Tarpa, do you ever envision using mandala or other tantric practices in SPT practice, but removing the supernatural things? I'm always open to it. We've had a lot of people ask about it. We've had people that talked about Oh, we could do chanting and doing mantras and malas and things like that. I think we've had people ask about mandalas as well. I think they're all great if people want to use them. I think as a group, it paints a bad picture. It's not really what we do, right? We're supposed to be secular Buddhism here at SBT. We're supposed to be sharing a curriculum that's kind of neutral based, one that we can all agree upon. So in our group, we have people that are very religious. I have a friend who just came back from Bhutan receiving Dzogchen empowerments, and he's as religious as you want to get on that side. And then we have people completely on the other side. So the magic of SBT is that this curriculum we have can appeal to everyone. It's the glue that holds us together. I recently wrote an article in maybe October's newsletter called Embracing Spiritual Beauty. And I talk about this to nausea, but I talk about, in a sense, I'm saying, if you ask me, I'm perfectly fine with people having statues and altars at home and doing mantras. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. We're here just to support. So we share what the Buddha taught. But what you want to do with it is wonderful. Do what you wish. Anyone can ask me questions about your personal practice if you want to reach out to me and you want to say, is it okay if I do this practice or that practice? We've already incorporated a few Mahayana and tantric practices, and I'm open to that as long as it seems to work. But I really like to stick to my roots, and that this is a secular group, and really, out of those three vehicles, we're really grounded in the Nikaya. To me, the Nikaya is the most authentic. I wouldn't say the best. I'm not saying the other ones aren't genuine paths, but as far as I'm a Buddhist myself, I want to follow the teachings of the Buddha. I don't want to do a Buddha Hindu mix or a Buddha something else mix. Zen Buddhism is another example where it's deeply influenced by Taoism and really changes a lot of its meaning. So myself, I'm a fan of the Buddha himself. I want to know what he actually taught. So that's where my heart lies. You're welcome, Craig. Oh, Mr. Campo, share, please.
Yes. So I'm curious, how does Tantra tradition reconcile the no self and the emptiness thing? It looks like they are not talking too much about it.
So philosophically, when you get into Vajrayana, the problem is it's an ancient school. So philosophically, so it comes from India at between the 7th and 11th century. At this time in Indian Buddhist history, they're practicing Vajrayana, but they're practicing a form called Yogacara philosophy. So the first Mahayana philosophy is Madhyamaka, believed to be written by Nagarjuna. The second one comes a couple hundred years later, and it's this form called Yogacara, or mind-only school. In Western philosophy, which dabbled with it, it's called objective idealism, the subjective idealism. My fault. Subjective idealism. And in a sense, you could say it's the idea that nothing really exists. Everything is an emanation of your mind, a projection of your mind, right? And this was a very strong Mahayana view. In fact, they got it to the point where the idea of emptiness was taken far beyond the original meaning that nothing has existence. Everything is empty of existence. Now, since that time, and so this is the original Mahayana philosophy that was taken to Tibet along with the Tantra. And we have the same problem in Zen, that this early Buddhism went to the East. We enchant Zen song, and they're also very much rooted in this Yogacara philosophy. basically the whole Buddhist world has abandoned it. And even those traditions are moving away from it rapidly. So they're all coming back to the Madhyamaka philosophy. And so it was a big mistake in Buddhism, you could say, or I'm saying. But the biggest mistake was misunderstanding the Buddhist teachings on self. Now, this is something I'm sharing that is nowadays is widespread with all modern scholars across all traditions, all the greats, Bhikkhu Bodhi, the Dalai Lama, everybody. The idea was that in the old days that Buddha taught there was no self. And really this is a problem more semantic with terminology than anything else. But it was a mistake. The Buddha never denies the self. The Buddha talks about defining what is the self. And he has teachings on those aspects that aren't self. So a lot of the tantric schools still follow that old tradition. And also, they pick up the influence of Hinduism and the Advaita tradition, and which brings in non-dualism, right? And so it becomes quite complicated. But I think all of the Buddhist worlds moved past all of these, kind of corrected for it. It's a big topic. I hope I shed some light on it. Does that help? Good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, to me, I simplify it by saying the Buddha taught no soul. The Buddha doesn't deny self, identity, right? We all have one. I got a self. It's named Tenzin Tarpa. Now, it's not a physical thing. I can't point to it. When I pass away, it's going to pass away with me. You know? But conceptual things are real. Any other questions? Did I wear you out? Fascinating subject, huh? Are you guys fascinated? Very cool. Yeah, but again, SBT doesn't tell anybody what to think, what to do, what to believe. We share the Dharma. We were created to support practitioners, period. I don't tell people what to think. I share what I know about the Buddha. You're smart. You can figure it out on your own. And do we all have to agree? Do all of us have to have exactly the same belief systems? Isn't that the problem with the religion? Okay, Mr. Williamson, thank you for joining the church. Here's a book of all your new beliefs that you're going to have. Please don't question any of them. Yeah, that's kind of a silly way to approach spirituality, right? Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to talk about. What are we going to do next week? Next week, we're going to get into talking about, so this was all about the Indian tradition. Next week, we're going to talk about the decline of Buddhism in India, which is a fascinating topic. But after that, we're going to be getting into the modern traditions, and it's going to end in a more formal piece on secular Buddhism. So I think pretty cool. That should get us into the new year, I think. And then we're going to be doing our School for Living program starting in the beginning of the year. And then in the spring, we're going to come back to Secular Buddhist Essentials. And this time into some heavy topics. We're going to get into what the Buddha taught, right? And that's some all those heavy topics you all want to know everything about. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hey, why don't we end today's teaching with our altruistic affirmation? May all be healthy. May all be prosperous. May all be well. May all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is the source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks for coming, everybody. I had a lot of fun.